The light in the sky was blinding, and close by. It hovered above the car, moving with it at every turn. When the car stopped and the four women got out, the light did not move. Scared out of their wits, the four women moved on, then stopped again. So too did the light. This time, there was a strange, small creature standing beside it. Were they all going mad, or was it really happening? 4:30 a.m., July the 24th, 1994. The terror begins. Terror that would haunt four women day after day, week after week, until they were never safe, not even in their own homes.
It's nothing I've ever seen, and it's definitely what you'd say is a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object. Never seen anything like it in my life.
In the early hours of that July morning, the women were on their way home after a reunion with old friends. They were tired, but it was only a 15-minute drive. Tina and Grace were in the front, Joy and Victoria in the back. Grace was driving. Suddenly, her attention was diverted from the road ahead.
I noticed these orange lights, like very long, oblong-shaped, lots of them, like in a big row.
Even now, the four women are nervous talking about their ordeal and want their identities kept secret.
You didn't know what to think of it at first because it was multicolored. It had lots of lights and it went like a strobe light would go, and it had incredible movement in the sky, and there was nothing that would move around like it ever.
They asked me what I thought it was. I said, it's a star. But it was moving, so it couldn't have been a star. So I thought maybe it's a satellite. And being skeptic, I didn't want to think what they were thinking. So in the end I said, well, I won't believe it unless it's on my tail.
As it turned out, prophetic words indeed. Grace put her foot down, tried to outdistance the lights.
And I was the first one to turn around, and it was like a sunset, orange, huge, that was hovering behind the car.
The back of the car was just lit up so brightly, which then I turned around and there was this huge, bright, sort of like the sun. It was so bright. And I just was overwhelmed with fear, which then I turned to Grace and I said, step on it, let's get out of here.
They thought safety was in sight. A parking lot, deserted, dark, but not for long.
I had slammed my hand onto the security lock to lock all the doors, but it was too late because Joy had jumped out of the car and gone to the back of the car to see where it had gone.
All of a sudden this thing was over the top of us, and it was just huge, and it hovered.
And you didn't have to stretch your neck or look very high up or anything like that. It would have only been as high as a telegraph pole.
They were afraid, very afraid. Strange lights, obviously following them, harassing them. Why?
Grace was upset, made us like, get back in the car. She was really scared, so we all got back in the car. And then we went to drive off. And that's when we noticed about 5 or 6 other things in the sky. But they were heaps smaller, real small.
Grace accelerated. The lights did too. It seemed there was no escape. Until, at last, they came to a driveway, a farmhouse. The lights, the craft on their tail. Frantic, Grace honked the car horn. No response, nothing. The 4 women were alone.
And then 2 lights sort of come from the left. It looked like they landed. And they were pretty close, but there was a lot of trees sort of on the boundary of the property. The girls in the front, that's when they said, "Did you see that?"
Their worst fears were about to be confirmed. A shadow fell across the blinding lights. A figure appeared, coming closer and closer. A silhouette, almost human, but not quite. Weird, ominous.
Just what impressed me was that it was so little. It was no more than 3 or 4 foot, and it looked like a little person.
And that is all they remember. That figure advancing toward them.
Like a shadow came over it, and it was like it was just gone. You couldn't see it. I just started that car up, and I reversed it out so fast and just took off like crazy.
The lights disappeared, and the 4 women thought the nightmare was over. But it was just beginning. First, the mystery of the missing time. It was now 6 a.m. and they'd set out at 4:30.
You know, I mean, it's a 15-minute drive at the best of times. And even if you know, with the stops that we made and you allowed, you know, a couple of minutes here or there, you could account for a half an hour, but you can't account for an hour and a half.
What happened to the 4 women during that missing hour? Where did the lights, the craft, the figure come from? They are questions which remain unanswered.
It wasn't a plane. It definitely wasn't a plane. It was just too low. A plane would have dropped out of the sky. It was just too low, too big.
I definitely think I saw a craft. I definitely think I saw a little person from one of those.
A craft, a UFO, an alien presence that would return to invade the victims' homes.
Obviously, it had been above my home, and what made me more upset that it was starting to affect my children, and I had no control on it, none at all.
Standing still. If there was just one witness to what happened, this sighting may have been dismissed. But there were 4 perfectly sane eyewitnesses. And a non-believer was about to get the shock of his life. That frightening night would not be put to rest. It would return to haunt each of the 4 women. There were the after effects: migraine headaches, nosebleeds, dizzy spells, and, in Grace's case, terrifying flashbacks.
I found it very hard to sleep. There was times that I sensed, don't ask me how because I really don't know, but I just knew there was something in my room. And this went on for quite a time. It got to a stage where I just didn't want to go to bed. I didn't want to sleep because I was so scared.
Grace dreaded being at home, alone. There was that uneasy feeling that she was under surveillance, being watched. Just a feeling, nothing tangible, until...
Little white, bright, practically even like a bluey haze around them, light that was moving around on the wall. And I'd sort of get up and go and touch something to sort of see if I could get a reflection, if it was something, always to see what could this be, but it was nothing. It'd sort of move about frantically and then disappear.
Grace felt isolated. There was no one she could turn to. No one except her 3 friends. Several weeks after the first encounter, they gathered at Tina's house. That was when the lights appeared again. Tina drew the blinds, refusing to believe the worst, that it was all about to begin again.
We thought, well, we didn't know where they came from, but we just sort of watched them with the blinds down, sort of when they blended together, asked them to move around in certain directions just to see if they, you know, whatever it was would do it, and it did. The lights moved around in whatever direction you told it to go into, whether it was up and down or right and left or, you know, it didn't matter. You know, jump to the other wall, it just did.
This went on for about, you know, a couple of minutes, and then it just disappeared. It was completely gone.
Grace, by now, was on the brink. It seemed there was nowhere left to hide. Wherever she turned, the lights were there, taunting her, tormenting her, even as she drove through the suburbs.
I noticed the same light, with the blue light around it. I noticed this thing in the sky, and I mean, my heart started pounding like mad, and I was really scared. I wanted to turn around and go back, but at that stage I thought, if I go back, my husband's going to think, you know, you really lost it. It was as if this thing was following me. That's the way I felt. I mean, that's just the way I felt, you know.
Back home that night, Grace was calmed by her husband. The family settled down, tried to sleep, and then...
At about 12:15, my son woke me, stood beside my bed, and he was beside himself, and he was crying and shouting. And I was like, you know, what's wrong with you? And he was saying, there's somebody in my room. I was screaming for you, so you didn't come.
Raced up out of bed and sort of went down to his room and had a look at all the rooms. I thought maybe there's someone in the house, you know, an intruder or something. And raced down and had a look at all the rooms, and nothing there, nobody there.
A moment of peace, but a new terror was about to descend.
I watched this thing come across the roof of our room, hovering over us. I was screaming at my husband to get out of the bed because I said to him, that's the thing that was that night that chased us. It was exactly the same ship.
She said, that's it, that's it. I said, what are you talking about? Just go back to bed.
But Grace persuaded her husband to come to the window to see for himself. At first, he could not believe his eyes.
It wasn't an airplane. I know what airplanes look like. I mean, I've lived near airports. I've flown a fair bit. You know, you hear the sound. There's no way this thing just travels so slow and so low that it's an airplane.
Obviously, it had been above my home, and what made me more upset that it was starting to affect my children, and I had no control on it, none at all. You think that being a mother, you can protect your children, but I couldn't.
That was the last encounter, the last time any of the women saw those lights. The creature that confronted them that night in July 1994 never reappeared. But the mystery remains, and so do the nagging fears. No one has been able to give a satisfactory explanation. All four women are convinced they've been stalked by a UFO. They all know what they saw. It actually happened. And Grace's husband, he didn't believe the story at first. Now, he's a believer too.
They are about the place. And I thought then I can accept the fact that, yes, you know, I've seen it with my own eyes, and, you know, and now they are there, yeah.
As for the women, they can only hope that their days and nights of terror are over.
I never believed in them, and, you know, they were just something out of a science fiction thing. You would never believe it until you've seen it. But I know differently now. I know that they do exist, and I believe it now because I know what's happened to us.